Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us tonight, once again, Dr. Buck Melton. Welcome, Buck. Now, maybe I can start the conversation tonight. I know we've gone over your political ambitions, but suppose you were in the Oval Office right now, which I know that if the fates will it, whatever the chances are, if they will that could happen. Anything is possible, as they say. But let's suppose you're there. How would you handle the Russian situation, and what do you think is going on in Putin's mind? At what eras, you mentioned this, that possibly we should have known what was going to happen here?
So let me get this straight. I've run for president, and I've won.
Well, somehow, mysterious circumstances have put you in there.
All right, so I've won.
I won't necessarily say they were legal, but
well,
suppose you were there.
Well, I was going to say, if I have run for president and I've won,
all right,
my first action would be to demand a recount.
Okay, well, let's suppose you're in there, right?
So,
you're forced,
but I'm in.
You're forced
right.
into the job.
Okay.
You've got your own personal chef, whatever else they have, I don't know. Personal chef, bodyguards.
Yes, all right.
Probably lots of nice things go on in the house. Okay, well, you're in that position.
I can't think of anything better to do than what we're doing right now. That a couple of episodes ago, of course, we talked about some of the basics of American foreign policy, this war between wanting to stay out of the business of the rest of the world. You know, as John Quincy Adams once said, that we should not go abroad in search of monsters to slay. And then on the other side, the idea of the last best hope, of being a stabilizing force in international affairs, of making the world safe for democracy. Coming out of World War II, when we were really the only great uninjured world power left, that we had to be the guarantor of world security, of European stability. And so we got this doctrine of containment that came out of the pen of George F. Kennan. The idea that the Russians have always been expansionists, they're out to take over Europe, and the only way that communism is just a new gloss on an old idea, and the only way to stop them will be to contain them where they are with American money and American nuclear power. And that became the basis for the Truman Doctrine, which Harry Truman announced in 1947. He said it's going to be the policy of the United States to help any country that's facing either the threat of an armed invasion or the uprising of an internal armed minority that's trying to overthrow the legitimate government. And that was speaking, he didn't, I don't think he used the term communism. He kind of was vague about that. But what were the two ways that communist regimes had come to power in the last 30 or 40 years when he made that statement? Either by armed invasion, what Stalin had done to Eastern Europe in 1945 and 1946, or an internal armed uprising, which is how the Bolsheviks gained control of the Soviet Union in 1918, 1919. So, and so that was our philosophy, that was our approach. And Truman issued the Truman Doctrine 2 years before the Soviets themselves got the bomb.
Or stole the bomb.
Well, yes, speaking of various means, legitimate and illegitimate. Yeah, that Los Alamos's best estimate was that it would take the Soviets between 10 and 20 years to develop the bomb. Well, they stole it. Thank you, Klaus Fuchs.
Right.
And so they suddenly got it in 49, and yet we continued to have the Truman Doctrine. The Truman Doctrine is what brought us into Korea. It is what brought us into Vietnam. And yet, doesn't it change things if your enemy now has this weapon that can threaten existentially the United States and the entire Western world? We build NATO in 1949 just before word comes that the Soviets have gotten the bomb. And the idea of NATO is an attack on one NATO member state, is an attack on all NATO member states. So what do we do when the Berlin Wall comes down in 1991? We start adding Eastern Europe to NATO. Now, if you're Russia, you've been invaded something like 8 times in the last 200 years. You've been invaded by Poland, you've been invaded by Germany, you've been invaded by everybody. There's just no good natural boundary in Eastern Europe along your western marches to stop you. And so what do we start doing? We start, if you will, annexing Poland and the Baltic states. Of course, anybody in Russia is going to see that as a potential threat. And so Putin starts telegraphing as we, I think, unwisely start adding the states of Eastern Europe to a now superfluous military alliance whose object has really ceased to exist. You know, Putin's obviously going to feel threatened by that, the same way they were threatened by everyone from Napoleon to Hitler. It's a more insidious type of threat, but it's still a threat. So who does he go after? He goes after Ukraine, because Ukraine is not yet a full-fledged member of NATO, and he figures he can do that and get away with it, and I think he's absolutely right. What are we going to do over Ukraine? Are we going to establish a no-fly zone? That is about the most limited military action I think the United States could take in Ukraine, no-fly zone. But that is going to lead at some point to an American or at least a NATO jet shooting down a Russian one, and there's going to be escalation.
Well, I mean, we've had our conversation on the top of the mountain, whatever, about the general species, how do we handle this, but just going down the mountain a bit and discussing the Russian situation and their history. So we have a really complicated set of world facts here. And I think one of the important things is the suffering the Russian people have been through. I mean, I think that's a reasonable thing to think about.
We have no idea here in America what they've gone through,
and indeed other countries. So I mean, what was our suffering here? Well, Sherman came through 150 years ago and put a cannonball in the cannonball house. Well, I don't know. I mean, and there are stories about things happening, but not. I mean, the Civil War was a bad thing, but generations have passed, and in general, there's a sense of well-being.
Yes.
Is present in North America.
Well, let's do talk numbers for a minute, because I think I think it can bring it home. Both sides, North and South, in the entire Civil War, if you just want to talk about combat, there are many other types of suffering. Slavery is suffering, but combat casualties, there's something like, I don't know, between 600 and 1 million combat casualties during the Civil War.
Yes.
Maybe 500,000 killed.
Yes.
If you look at the Soviet Union in World War II, just World War II, I don't know what the numbers are. I mean, the lowest numbers I've seen are 10 million. More realistically, it's probably 20. It could go as high as 50. And that's not counting the first Russian Revolution. That's not I mean, it's just the amount, what those people have been through. And I'm not at all trying to justify what they're doing to Ukraine. What they're doing to Ukraine is absolutely wrong. But yet you have to understand the Russian mindset.
I mean, I'll make one little. I'm going to swing to that. I'll make one little comment about the Civil War and how draconian. I mean, I was saying that there's a sense of well-being, but if you do go back 150 years, that was a very bad war, and I think the total Caucasian population in the United States was less than 30 million. I'll pick a number.
Yeah. So you're looking at like 2% casualty rate or something.
And the deal is the economic dislocations were extraordinary.
Yeah.
So you can look in Georgia, the situation, schools, the whole horrible story. And if you probe your family, going back, well, this is what happened. And it was a pretty difficult.
Andersonville.
Just in general, the situation was a very, very bad one for a long time. And particularly the South was far beneath the rest of the country in regards to many, many numbers and facts and prosperity. But let's move past that. Let's just think about the story out there is the culture of different countries, the sense of peoplehood different countries have, their viewpoints they have, are often not knowable for us here in America. So a terrific mistake is often made when we say, it appears that you're doing something illogical and evil. That's our viewpoint. I mean, and then, therefore, you have to be punished for doing something illogical and evil. But from the other side, they have a defense which they could produce that might not comport with our ideas about right and wrong. Nevertheless, there's one there. So if you look at the Russian story, they had all these terrible intrusions, as you mentioned, from everywhere. They're in the middle of the Eurasian landmass. There are no fixed borders anywhere. People come through going to the right, going to the left, and indeed, populations from this landmass often sweep into Western Europe as archaeologists discuss the, I guess you call them the Aryans, that swept through from the steppes into all of Europe 4,500 years ago, and going back and forth. There's been there's no natural boundaries there, so lots of interchanges, lots of insecurity, terrible climate. The climate is bad, and the number of towns there, which could be reservoirs of civilization, are small, and so this really totalitarian kind of culture arose. And it hooked up with Christianity in a way, that a special kind of rather beautiful Christianity, I must say, the Orthodox Church, so they went through all of these things. And if you were, and a peasant class was there, most Russians, it would be like, well, really, there was a sense of what you could call slavery that existed for most Russians.
Serfdom until the 1860s or thereabouts.
1862 or about the same time our Civil War was fought. The Tsar freed all the serfs who were attached to the land. So it was a very primitive kind of situation. Not many people educated, a very disturbed social arrangement, and the power of the state was extraordinary, and that just was imprinted. This, in my opinion, a lot of imprinting went on in the Russian people who had suffered. I mean, if you read, it's some pretty interesting movies about the Tartars sweeping in and how it was really powerful stuff about what the deal was in 1500. It was unspeakable. And then Alexander Nevsky is another great movie about the Teutonic Knights sweeping in and whatever. Constantly attack, constantly this, constantly that. And then the communist revolution, where the whole deal did not have a democratic imprint. So the way the idea is the masses, the people are out there. They're like this, I don't know, lump of clay.
I have to interject something here just for a moment. That shortly after the wall came down and the Soviet Union disintegrated, and you had for a while the Commonwealth of Independent States, and you started having open elections in Russia for a while in the early 90s, and ABC News or somebody was there on the street, I think in Red Square or something, interviewing people. And there was this old woman, and I just know she lived through World War II, had probably been in the siege of Leningrad or something, and she says, well, now we go into the voting booth and there are 2 or 3 different names and we don't know which one to pick. And it's a terrible problem.
Yeah, I mean, no one tells you.
And she was legit. I mean, she was confused. It's like, I don't know what to do.
I don't really routinely do this.
Yeah,
and so the idea of, I don't know what I can, peasanthood, I don't know what I can, what the right word is. But certainly the democratic viewpoint of the West is not there too much. And the communists, when they did their deal here, there was never, let's just take a fair vote and we'll see what everybody wants. And everything was manipulated, and it was a control with a lash of the state there, not so different than the czars, for the benefit of the people, this mass of citizens that their viewpoints were certainly not attended to, or only indirectly. Well, coming through all that, and then going through the terrible decline, from their point of view, the decline of the Soviet Union was, I could see that. I was in Moscow when '91, when the place blew up. And
I did not know that.
I was as a matter of fact, I went there on Lufthansa, the 50th anniversary of the start of the German attack on the Soviet Union, and it was a tremendous meeting. I could talk a lot about it, but it was a neurosurgical meeting, quite an event. And in Moscow at the time, the sense of destruction and under the surface shame and failure was painful. I mean, just to see it, and the artwork was there. There were some good things. People were coming out of the deal. The commissars were gone. People had been in the gulag. I bought a trumpet from a guy that blew it, and he said, "I don't care what anybody tells me. Here's $10 for your trumpet. I'm out of the gulag. Go to whatever, on and on." And you couldn't have blown a trumpet in the past. People were selling things, and I was followed by a soldier. What's the guy? He came up to me and took his hat off, his military hat. $1. Can you? I want to buy your hat for $1. I did that, and all kinds of things. And I would say too, the womanhood of the place was sort of on for sale. I'd say that. And if you're a patriotic Russian and you observe this, and you have the sense of the loss of power, this is what happens when you lose power. And the thing that kept our country together has been strong, centralized power, vicious power that's needed to prevent anything like this from ever happening again. And from a geopolitical story, looking at the deal, well, geopolitically, the people have been so injured by and I think we don't understand this enough.
Yeah,
the fall of the Soviet Union psychologically injured lots and lots of people. Not everybody, but lots of people are psychologically injured, and they want revenge. Not so dissimilar to the way the Germans, the defeat in World War I brought forth the Nazis.
I think even more so, though, because ever since you get, for instance, Peter the Great, Catherine the Great, and you get this westernizing influence, at least in Western Russia and in the upper crusts, Russia really did see itself, and a lot of this is artifice, of course, as one of the bulwarks of Western civilization in Europe. They had withstood Napoleon.
Yes.
They had put down Hitler. And also if you buy into the Marxist dialectic, the idea that Russia is the wave of the future, and then to have that come crashing down in just a really short period of time, it really could cause a sense of existential crisis. Geopolitical concerns aside, just the effect on the Russian psyche.
The sense, I think this is a normal human thing. If your whatever class system or your notion of your personal place in the world is knocked down, then people get very angry, and I think that's in many ways the leadership is there. And another thing I'll say this, is I've been to Russia several times, and was there, and sort of the criminal, there was sort of the KGB were sort of conducting kind of quasi-criminal things to support the state, whatever they were up to.
Yeah.
Then after and the good Russian citizens were clueless. We don't know how to smuggle things around, or I don't know, do whatever. We don't know how to do that. We're just civil servants, and we write papers on pure water or whatever we do, and that's what we do. We come to work, we earn $200 a month, and we have our life. So when the place blew up, the criminal KGB types became the plutocrats. So another sick's the wrong word, but some problem psychologically with the system in Russia is like a very meritorious person. I'm going to start my own, I don't know, filling station. I'm going to be a plumbing contractor. They're a typical American success story. The people that became these oligarchs were, in my opinion, I'm speaking in general terms here, they certainly had a sense of KGB-ism about it, and the idea that we function in this way where we manipulate the system for our own benefit. And out of that, that's another card in the deck, the oligarchs that are there with this extraordinary lifestyle, which is far past the normal Russian citizen. And finally, to make another comment, the health system is, I won't get everything into it, but certainly the life expectancy is terrible. People drink, it's cold, they don't have a lot of money, they smoke, they die, the males die at 50. The demographic decline of Russia is impressive. So when the conflict was taking place, Kennedy was in Berlin, so the population, I'll make these numbers up, maybe the US was 160 million and the Soviet Union was 280 million. From that, and that, of course, but that doesn't matter much, people on the street. However, if you're in the position of asserting Russian influence, the population situation is now 140 million people, or 140 million, half the population. And the US population is approaching 350 million. So our population doubled, and their population dropped in half. Their economy, the whole deal, they're in this really bereaved situation. And you could form that point of view. Their geopolitical situation is so shaky, so difficult, that this mistake happened. It's a substantial mistake that occurred with their policy, and I think it's understandable. It's just the same way, in a way, you can't forgive it, but it's understandable the way the Nazis arose from the defeat in World War I.
Yeah, there's a difference.
Very similar. There are differences.
Yeah,
but
there's a difference between understanding and approving, and it's
of
certainly
course,
understandable.
I'm not.
And
proposing,
it's entirely predictable.
I'm not proposing. What
and
it's good.
Of course,
but, I mean, it's just there's reasons cause things to happen.
But we contributed by spiking the ball when we did not need to, because Americans are traditionally not all that good at getting or understanding foreign policy.
Yes.
We have, if you're born and raised in Europe and you're having to deal with all of these tribes around you, we
have a lot of naivete, don't we?
That we're good straight shooting Americans, and we figure if everybody else is good straight shooting people, we can all reach an agreement. But we just don't understand the complexities, the agendas, the centuries of history. I mean, individual people do. I think there are people in the State Department who have a good feel for things, but they're not at the highest levels. At the political level, you get people who I don't know who may not even have the time to listen to the good mission briefs and stuff like that. There's other thing going on. There should be, but.
Well, I mean, I'm going back to you being in the Oval Office, and so if you making the case that the forces of history are playing themselves out in the Eurasian steppes there, and I've talked about from a brutal point of view, the idea is, well, the only way to redeem this great nation is to throw a punch. That's the only, if we sit here like this, we're going to just be corrupted. And the deal that's the Western poison pill that's appearing is destructive to Russian national identity. The idea that we mentioned globalism jumping around. Well, the idea is globalism is not something that sells too easily, though that's what's happening. So it may well be that Putin likes all this. If you wanted a secure Russian state the way Stalin had one, maybe you want all those boundaries. Maybe maybe all of these things are good from that ambition. The Western response, what I'm finally getting into, is the Western response may be playing into Putin's hands about we're going to think about it. We're going to do all of these sanctions. We're going to do all of these sanctions. And you can imagine how the Russian television, or mass media, which is at the service of the state. I mean, they're not there to, give both sides to a story. They're there to, they've done this, they've done that. You can imagine the American. You only have one viewpoint of what's happening, and the Americans tried to get back, I don't know, Alaska, whatever. Somebody took Alaska from us, and then and then doing something we think is righteous. Everyone's against us, so we're going to be all together. We're going to be solid. We're going to be behind our commander. So dictators routinely like war, and I would submit that they routinely like sanctions. Now that maybe I'm overstating that slightly, but at least it should be considered. And many people would say, for instance, in Cuba, the sanctions that have kept the communists in power there, and it gives
them an enemy. So,
are you have comments?
Yeah. Well, and we need to start wrapping up in a minute.
Right.
But our two options, I think, are to do what we're doing or to do nothing. And this gets really complicated because as president, what are my interests? Are they to see to the security of the American people or to build an international community? Well, obviously, first and foremost, the security of the American people. But how do I do that? Do I look short run because I got to get reelected, or do I look long run even if that injures my party in the short run? I would say in the long run, we do have to show that stability in the international order is to be desired. Russia can't be allowed to get away with this. We can't use military action because they could escalate to weapons of mass destruction, which would endanger the United States. And so we do use sanctions with the hope that the pressure this brings to bear on the common people of Russia will encourage them to carry out regime change. So that is my rationale for it. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't.
That's exactly my point. And so I think if you look at where the sanctions are hitting, they're hitting sort of Western people that live in Moscow and St. Petersburg. And so there's a group of people there. They're in the big cities, but out in the provinces, way out there, the impact is not so much. You've been eating black bread or whatever, drinking vodka. Your supplies are unimpaired. You have heat for your house. You can grow cabbages. And so what if you can't go to Paris next winter?
Yes.
Or so what if you have some kind of super duper ability to use the internet? You can't do it now. And maybe you cut back slightly on your lifestyle. Well, your pension drops by $1.
Well, the only other option is to become isolationist again and do nothing and say, well, too bad, glad I'm not you. But then that runs right into the headlong problem of appeasement. Give Hitler what he wants and then he'll calm down.
I don't suggest appeasement.
Yeah.
I don't suggest that. I just think the whole idea of sanctions is complicated.
It's very complicated.
It's been presented. The other point that's out there, I'll end on this, is that the whole story in many ways has been politicized, just like the coronavirus has been politicized. Mm-hmm. So this has been politicized.
Well, obviously,
and if you try and say whatever this, that, whatever, what's the right way to play this deal, and there's a lot of got you going on here, whatever, a lot of stuff, and a person in the Oval Office has got to do something.
Yes.
There's no question about it. And is what is happening? Is that the right thing to do? Is it? Apparently, there was some effort at carefully orchestrating the sanctions.
Yes.
But it's complicated.
Well, I guess I'll end this segment with what I began with about 2 episodes ago.
Yes.
The allusion to Churchill and that democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others.
Right.
I think Biden he's doing a good job with a really, really bad hand. There is no good answer here.
Okay. Well, on that note, Buck, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
We'll talk some more. Good luck with the politics.
Oh, jeez. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.